We begin on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers who may be feeling anxious about the prolonged shutdown or the possibility of a default in the coming days can take a little steam off. They can relax at the House gym. Yes, while government services around the country have been slashed, furloughing more than 800,000 federal workers, including medical researchers, meteorologists, food safety inspectors, transportation safety officials, and so on, all deemed non-essential during the shutdown, the House gym, which boasts a swimming pool, a sauna, and a basketball court, has been deemed essential, and it's been up and running throughout the fiasco. Although it is reported that towel service at the gym has been discontinued, so I guess the pain is spreading around. Meanwhile, Republicans in the House are pushing forward with more piecemeal funding bills to reopen parts of the government. Today, House Republicans passed legislation to provide funding to families of soldiers who've died in wars overseas since the shutdown. 5 members of the military were killed in Afghanistan over the weekend. Now, normally, $100,000 is given to these families within 3 days to handle funeral costs and other expenses. But since the shutdown, those checks have been withheld. Republicans in the House are also attempting to fund flight safety inspectors at the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, Democrats are opposed to this piecemeal funding strategy, perhaps because, as this chart shows, it would probably be another 10 weeks before Republicans got around to fully funding the government. If indeed they do intend to fill out the rest of that pie chart, maybe that's the point. Also, we're receiving more clarity on what the U.S. government may be facing if the debt limit is not raised in the next week or so. Essentially, the Treasury will not be allowed to borrow any more money, meaning it will have to cover the government's daily expenses with whatever tax revenue is coming in that particular day. Basically, the U.S. government would be living paycheck to pay off creditors, retirees, and other services. Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the U.S. government receives on average, $7 billion a day in revenue, some days more, some days less. So just how far can $7 billion get the U.S. government day to day? Well, let's look at the calendar. Not very far, because on October 23rd, the government will owe Social Security benefits beneficiaries a payment of $12 billion, plus billions in other obligations. $7 billion won't cover it. Then on November 1st, huge obligations to Medicare doctors, Social Security recipients, and members of veterans and our military come due, totaling more than $58 billion. Next up on November 14th, another $12 billion in Social Security payments come due. And on November 15th, the Treasury needs to pay a $29 billion interest payment on our debt. Now that's an important date, since if the U.S. can't meet that obligation, then it would officially be in default. So the Republican strategy of prioritizing debt payments to avoid default once we pass the debt limit may work, but it will only work until November 15th. So that's what the United States is looking at if no deal is reached here. So what should we make out of all of this? Well, for more, I'm joined by Ben Swann, founder of benswann.com. Ben, welcome to the show. So,
Sam, thanks for having me.
As a reporter, how do you think the government shutdown should be covered by the media? I mean, should blame be assigned to both parties in the interest of fair and balanced reporting? Or is one side clearly to blame here? How do you see it?
Well, I struggle a little bit even with the word balance, because balance indicates there's only two sides here, right? The right side and the left side, which media obviously wants us to believe there is. It's this whole left-right paradigm. Obviously, there are a lot more sides to this issue than simply that. How does media cover it? Well, one of the problems we run into is media is constantly running this clock, if you will, trying to determine where the pulse of the American people is to decide, are they angry at Republicans? Are they angry at Democrats? Are they angry at Washington for the way they're conducting the shutdown? Are they angry at Washington for not allowing vets at the World War II Memorial? Are they mad at Congress for having their gym open? And so it's this kind of 24/7 game of trying to gauge where the people are, instead of talking about the real issues at hand, which of course in this case really come back to the issue of the fact that we have a law that was, whether you like the Affordable Care Act or not, was legally passed by the Congress. It was signed into law by the president, and whether you like it or not, it was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. It should be passed into law.
So, well, I mean, just going off that point here, I mean, there are a lot of similarities between the both parties, and you could indict both of them on you know, how they respond to war, surveillance, you know, coziness with Wall Street, all those things you can find problems with Republicans and Democrats. On this issue, though, this is one of the few issues where there are huge differences between the two parties on this Obamacare law. And that seems to be a sticking point. I guess the other sticking point is this idea of the sequester and spending cuts, which seems to be Democrats and Republicans aren't on the right page here on that. Am I wrong in saying that's what's fueling the shutdown? And if I'm not wrong on that, then doesn't the media have an obligation to point out the fact that Republicans are basically acting, you know, troublesome in this area?
Well, I think that the left and right are much closer on this issue than we give them credit for, because even though there is the appearance that they are really, you know, working opposite each other here, look, the big issue here that's not being addressed is simply this. If Congress was truly interested in providing fairness, because they keep talking about, well, delaying the individual mandate till 2015 because the employer mandate has been delayed until 2015, that's really what this fight back and forth is over, then they would talk about the fact that essentially, if you want to have a fair law, then apply it equally to everyone. And that doesn't just mean for the employer mandate. It means for every exemption that's been granted, including the fact that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, we have an article about this at benswann.com, John Boehner and Harry Reid working together to try to preserve a subsidy for congressional staff members. And so where they're more similar than different is that both Republicans and Democrats have gone along with the idea that certain groups should receive exemptions and they should receive subsidies, whereas other segments of the population do not. If you want to make it fair, then say if the law should be instituted fairly, everyone is going to be subjected to it the same way. If we're not going to have it, then you release everyone from it the same way. But we don't have that argument right now. It goes back to the same issue with the debt ceiling when we're talking about that issue. The fight's going to be over where the spending cuts need to happen. But what neither side is going to talk about is the fact that under the 14th Amendment, the U.S. government must service the debt first. It must service outstanding debt. After that, everything else, including entitlement programs, come later. And so when you gave those numbers a few minutes ago, and it was a lot of numbers for folks, about $200 billion a month is what the U.S. brings in tax revenue. You bring in $200 billion a month, that means you have to service debt interest payments first, and then everything else comes next. Well, that's where the battle is over. It's not going to be, in fact, over the reality of that, because both sides are going to say the full faith and credit of the United States will be hanging in the balance, and that's actually untrue.
Right, but you know, you said $200 billion a month on a daily basis. That works out to like $7 billion a day, and the Treasury is not going to be able to bank on tax revenue coming in at the end of the month when they're there at the first of the month, given the way that the borrowing works and how they can't borrow anymore. So when we get to one of these debt servicing payments that exceed $7 billion on that one day, aren't we flirting with a serious problem here? And for members of Congress who are saying that this might not be so bad once we go over the debt limit, and it might not be so bad for a few days or a few weeks, isn't that being disingenuous?
Well, where they're disingenuous is when they say it won't be so bad until something that they believe in has to be cut. It's doable. It's possible to do this and to keep the debt service, you know, debt being serviced, excuse me. The problem they're going to run into is when Republicans suddenly realize they don't have the money to fund every military program they want to fund, or they don't have money to pay veterans the checks that they are deserving. Then Republicans are going to say, oh, wait a minute, now this is too far, this is a problem. On the left, it's going to be the same issue with whatever issues that they support. So if it's Social Security, they're going to say, wait a minute, we can't support this. And so that's what we really see right now, is that it's possible for the government to continue to function by just servicing the debt through the amount of tax revenue that's coming in. What's not possible is for every project they support. And so all of a sudden, there's going to be, you know, the wailing and gnashing of teeth when their particular project can't get funded. And that's where we're going to see the real back and forth over this issue. And ultimately, that's why when members of Congress say it won't be so bad, they're being disingenuous, because they're saying it won't be so bad if your stuff gets cut, not if my stuff gets cut.
Gotcha. The media also has been focused on who's going to win this. You know, they've been saying the longer this default goes on, Democrats will win, or shutdown goes on, Democrats will win. Or looking back to 95, 96, Republicans lost, so that's going to be what happens now. But really, all of this makes government look bad. It makes Congress look bad. And in the end, doesn't that benefit political parties that have belief systems centered on scaling back government, maybe libertarians or people who are running on a platform that, look, government isn't as necessary as we've been led to believe?
Well, I think the one group that is right now looking at this whole situation and saying, we told you so, are libertarians and groups who say, for instance, you know, we see this incredible crackdown on people being in national parks, because you can't possibly allow someone to go into a national park, you know, if it's been shut down by the government. Or parts of the ocean around the Florida coast that have been shut down as part of this government shutdown because people can't go fishing. And so what we're seeing over and over is that there is an attempt by government, in this case, to inflict pain on the citizenry in order to make sure that they, you know, prompt Congress to move on this. And that makes government look very bad, because ultimately it highlights the point that a lot of folks have been making as of late, which is that government does not act as a representative of the people. It acts as a lord over the people. And this is a great example of that in many people's minds.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And those libertarians who are benefiting happen to be a lot of the people who are taking the hardline stance here. But we're out of time. Ben Swann, founder of benswann.com. Thanks so much.
Sam, thanks.